Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening or good morning, wherever you might be tuning in from. I am delighted to welcome you all to our final panel event of World EV Day 2021, Back to School, School Bus Electrification and V2G in partnership with Highland Electric. My name is Katherine Stainken, and I'm the Senior Director of EV Policy at the Electrification Coalition. The EC is a 501c3 nonprofit that's focused on getting to mass adoption of electric vehicles. And personally, I'm very excited to be talking about electric school buses today because I have such fond memories of riding the bus to school, to sporting events, to class trips. But the exhaust spewing out of the back tailpipes was always something very unpleasant, and I know that we can all do better. Well, today is World EV Day, a day which is all about getting as many people around the world excited and involved with electric vehicles as soon as possible. And what better way to help future generations and to help the air that our children breathe keep it clean than talking about electrifying school buses. And to set the scene and explain why electrifying school buses is so important for the health of our communities, I'd like to first introduce Trisha Dello, the National Field and Legislative Manager for the Moms Clean Air Force. Trisha brings the voices and stories of concerned parents from across the country to members of Congress to advocate for policies that protect kids' health. This work is deeply personal to Trisha. She has 4 children, Logan, Liam, Lincoln, and Josie, and Liam sadly deals with chronic health issues after being exposed to toxins in his environment twice. And Trisha has made it her life's mission to ensure that all children have access to clean air and protections from toxic chemicals. Thank you for joining us, Trisha, and I'll hand it over to you now to give us a couple of opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Katherine, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be part of this panel of esteemed thought leaders who are leading the way towards electrifying our nation's school buses. As parents, we are filled with cautious optimism and a lot of hope for a successful back to school season, but the ongoing COVID epidemic is at the forefront of everyone's minds. Here in the US, many of our children are preparing to venture back in person schooling for the first time in over a year. It's a time of both excitement and a lot of anxiety. Parents want to make sure that our children's places of learning are healthy and safe environments in which our children can thrive. Yet 95% of our nation's iconic yellow school buses still emit harmful diesel emissions. This means every day, millions of children hop onto the school bus that run dirty diesel engines. Diesel pollution can trigger asthma attacks, and it interferes with our children's ability to learn. Diesel exhaust is a known human carcinogen, and the tiny particles of pollution in diesel exhaust can lodge deep into the lungs and cause irritation. In addition to the short-term problems like coughing, headaches, nausea, breathing these fumes has been shown to damage both the lungs and the heart. Children are actually more vulnerable to diesel pollution than adults. Young lungs and hearts work harder than those of adults. Children take in more breaths and their hearts beat faster. Their organ systems are still growing, especially their lungs, which actually are not mature until they reach 20 years of age. Even worse, the air actually inside a school bus can be more polluted than the air outside of it. Diesel pollution can seep inside the bus cabin from the tailpipe and then gets trapped inside. That means that children may be getting an extra large dose of diesel pollution during their school commute. I want to share a story of a mother who lives in Nevada and whose children attend a Title I school. Jen Cantley is the mom to 3 young boys. Both Jen and her son Gabriel suffer from asthma that is made worse by air pollution. Recently, the air quality where Jen lives in northern Nevada was considered very unhealthy due to nearby wildfire smoke. Jen has shared with me often the struggles that she and Gabriel have been having with their asthma and breathing. Just going outside from the house to the car causes Jen and Gabriel to have asthma attacks. Because the air quality inside a diesel school bus can be up to 10 times worse than the air outside, Jen often has to decide whether she will allow her children to ride the school bus each morning. You see, diesel is known to aggravate asthma. Jen knows that riding in a diesel-fueled school bus could make Gabriel's asthma even worse, and no parent wants to put a child in harm's way. But it's not just the asthma attacks that moms are concerned about. Diesel buses run on fossil fuels, and the pollution from their tailpipes makes climate change worse. We parents know climate change is a health crisis. It's harming our communities and our families right now. Just last week, a tornado ripped through my tiny town in southern New Jersey. You probably heard about it on the news. I live in Mullica Hill. Last week showed us that climate change is literally knocking on our doors. It's rattling our windows and disrupting our lives in significant ways. It's destroying our homes, drowning people inside their apartments, and more. We need a cleaner, healthier future now. With transportation as the largest leading source of US greenhouse gas emissions, it's time to transition to electric transportation. Our more than 1 million parents know that they are serious about accelerating the transition to 100% zero emission transportation to help protect our children's future. We parents are compelled to act. This is why I couldn't be more excited to share this platform with the very thought leaders who are accelerating our transition to zero emission electric school buses. We have no time to lose. With that, I want to turn it back to you, Katherine. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Trisha. That was super powerful to hear the story about the Nevada mom. And I know that's the same story for so many other parents and guardians around the country today, concerned about their children's health from the tailpipe pollutions from diesel school buses. So I'm excited to get into the solutions later on with our panelists. But first, before we dive in and meet our first panel speaker, who is in fact our panel sponsor today, I'd like to share a brief video first from President Biden's National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy. And Gina is going to speak to us about World EV Day and school buses. So we're going to just play that video clip right now.
We're looking at a goal of 500,000 charging stations that we can add, and we're going to be working with the business sector to move that forward. We're looking at zero emission buses. We're looking at not just the transit vehicles that you see behind you, but those yellow school buses don't have to be dirty anymore. We can keep our kids' lungs protected. We're talking about $6 billion in investments in battery manufacturing and processing, because we want to build it here in the United States. We have to be with the Union of Auto Workers and recognize that the future is not just going to be a cleaner bus fleet or auto fleet. It's going to be about growing good union jobs, because we certainly need both. So we're excited about the massive kind of down payment we can make now, because we want the United States to be a leader in this again. We were, and we're going to be again.
Great. That was fantastic. And another just great segue into the rest of the conversation we're going to be having here with our panelists. And if you'd like to watch that full interview with Gina McCarthy, that will be available on the World EV Day YouTube channel. But right before we get into introducing our panelists, first, I'd like to just take a moment and thank our panel partners. And our panel partner for this event is Highland Electric. And Highland Electric provides school districts with a customized solution to electrify their school bus fleet. Highland provides districts with everything they need to run zero-emission school buses, including the vehicles, charging infrastructure, managed charging, and reimbursement for unexpected maintenance. Thank you, Highland Electric, for supporting World EV Day today. And then also one more thank you, a huge thank you to ABB, who is our proud headline partner for the second year for World EV Day. So, all right, without further ado, we will get into our panelists right now. First up, we're going to have Duncan McIntyre, who is the CEO and our panel partner from Highland Electric. Then we're going to have Jackie Piero, who's the VP of Policy from Nuvve. Then we've got JoAnn Covington, who's the Chief Legal Officer and Head of Government Relations for Proterra. And then finally, we have Nate Baguio, who's the Senior VP of Commercial Development for Lion Electric. And we'll definitely have the opportunity for live Q&A with all of these great speakers. So I encourage you all in the audience, wherever you're tuning in from, to type your questions into the chat, and we will present those questions to our speakers. So right now, I'd like to introduce to you Duncan McIntyre. Duncan founded Highland Electric in 2018 and is responsible for the overall company vision, leadership, and strategy. So thank you, Duncan, for joining us today. I will turn it to you. And one more reminder to the audience, please type your questions into the Q&A function.
Katherine, thank you very much. Appreciate you organizing this group of us for this panel today. And to Trisha in particular, thank you so much. What a great lead in. As someone else with kids, really appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you so much and keep it up. I think, the the topic today is all about school bus electrification with a particular angle around V2G. So I wanted to just hit on a couple topics. So as you learned in the lead-in here, Highland focuses entirely on school bus electrification. We don't manufacture anything like Proterra or Lion, and we don't develop software like Nuvve, but we provide a managed solution. And when we think about the innovations that are happening in the market, they include technology innovations, better tech, lighter materials, manufacturing getting to scale, better reliability, more available product on the market. But we're also seeing that product doesn't jump off the shelf without sort of an ecosystem of services that need to be wrapped around it to really make it affordable and simple enough for transportation directors, cities, municipalities to go all electric. I think our offering at Highland is all about providing transportation as a service, and some people call it energy as a service, but effectively it's breaking down the cost barrier with financing and bringing future values forward. I'll get into that in a moment, but it's also about taking on the project management, the design, the construction, and sort of the gluing together of multiple stakeholders to make these projects comprehensive and successful. Our reaction has been there's lots of demand for electrifying school bus fleets, but because of the cost and complexity, projects have largely been limited to small pilots that are grant funded. If we take a more comprehensive approach as an industry, where product and technology and services and capital come together in a really elegant way, these transitions are viable today in an affordable way and at scale. I think it's useful to touch on some of the sort of local partnerships, members of the community that help make this happen in a really meaningful way. So there's utility companies. They are a key partner to any electrification project, as they typically provide the power, the interconnection, and some equipment in some cases. I think utility companies have come a long way in the last 5 years around opening up their skills and capabilities to provide power to sites and help, in some cases, design and build out these sites to electrify depots. But they can also be a very instrumental partner in delivering additional value that helps make electrified school bus projects more affordable. So vehicle to grid, this is a topic that's been, I think, discussed. There's lots of white papers. There's companies like Nuvve that have dedicated themselves to furthering the industry, providing the services, providing the tech. But ultimately, it comes down to the energy markets being willing to accept and receive the value of the power in some sort of a commercial manner. So when we think about how we can electrify school bus fleets in the most meaningful way, it's about all these stakeholders coming together, state agencies, utilities, grant administrators, but also it's about unlocking all the future values in ways that are reasonable and approachable for transportation departments. I think I know my 5 minutes is sort of coming to an end, but I'll wrap it up with one quick example. Our project, it's a school bus electrification project in Beverly, Massachusetts. It happened to be our first, has just spent the last 3 months sending power back to National Grid. It's helping National Grid, the local utility, to shift the peak. And that is an activity that is otherwise very expensive, but batteries can be really instrumental in helping sort of balance that peak demand on the system. And we get paid every single day for doing that. That value helps us justify the investment in electric school buses and offset the cost and deliver value to the city of Beverly in the form of lower emissions, lower improved environmental footprint, quiet vehicles, reliable projects, and all done in a budget neutral environment to the cost of putting a diesel bus on the road. So I think we need to work together and really get the stakeholders together like we did in Beverly as an industry to create lots more success stories like that. So thank you everyone for participating. It's exciting to be part of this group today, and I'll kick it back to you, Katherine.
Great, thank you, Duncan. That was great opening remarks there. And I was really picking up on the themes that Highland Electric is making the electric school bus sector now affordable at scale, and then really showing this additional value. So we have a bunch of questions that have come in, but in terms of that additional value, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the resiliency aspect that electric school buses can provide, and especially in terms of the V2G. And I think you were getting at it right there at the end with the national grid and the services and electricity back to the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the tech exists today to put an electric school bus project in place and backflow power to a recipient. In the Beverly situation, we're sending it back to National Grid, largely because they are willing and eager to pay for it. And that helps us offset the investment in capital to justify the project. There are plenty of other use cases, though. We could, in theory, send that power directly to the middle school, which is across the street from the bus depot, to provide backup power in the case of a power outage. I think the biggest problem with resiliency is historically no one has been willing to pay for it. And it doesn't mean that this movement needs to be defined entirely by commercial economics and people willing to pay for things. But in the early days of the market, justifying the investment is tricky, and it requires all the value streams possible. We have a few projects where we're effectively marrying up a microgrid with a smart meter that can island. And those projects will allow us to send stored power in the bus batteries back to a community center in one case and a school in the other case. And those can offer backup power for 24 hours in both cases, with a string of buses sort of providing a consistent flow with the right equipment. So the tech is available, the commercial structures are complicated, but we need to keep pressing and make it a reality in more places.
Yeah, I like that, making it a reality in a lot of different places. We've got another question coming in from Patrick in our audience, and he is wondering, so can you give us a point-by-point, step-by-step process maybe to pushing school boards to adopting electric school buses? Are there certain arguments that work better, or are there questions that are coming up that you found a good answer for?
Yeah, so I think it starts by creating a plan with the chief business officer and the transportation director, and getting those two individuals fully on board with a transition plan. The plan has to prove that the fleet can be reliable, affordable, and clean. It's got to meet all three of those criteria. We do this type of planning exercise with all of our customers when we set up a project. I know you're going to hear from Nate at Lion and JoAnn from Proterra, and other panelists have different businesses where they also help their customers with this type of planning exercise. So I think it can be found in lots of places, but it's really about looking at the fleet with the transportation director, the duty cycles, the makeup of the fleet, the cost of keeping the vehicles on the road, all the dynamics that are relevant, the temperature, the grade of the terrain, right? There's a bunch of variables. And then figuring out how you can afford to do it. We have one solution that's we think is a really compelling way to make electrification affordable and simple. But I think getting a chief business officer or CFO involved in sort of unpacking the budget and the numbers and thinking about it from a commercial standpoint helps a lot. And then I think that's the package that one needs to go to a school board and move forward.
Well, great. Thank you, Duncan. And with that, we're going to move to our next panelist, and we'll look forward to talking with you later. So our next up, we have Jackie Piero, who is the VP of Policy at Nuvve. And Jackie is responsible for assessing the state of policy and regulatory landscape, market structures, and energy ecosystems to determine what business models and services are possible. And Jackie, will bring you up on screen now. And just a reminder to our audience, you are more than welcome to put in additional questions here for Duncan and now for Jackie also into the Q&A. Great, welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Piero, and as you said, I am the Vice President of Policy for Nuvve. We are a software platform provider that actually coordinates, controls, and dispatches electric vehicles, both for just fleet control to make it easier for a fleet of school buses, for example, so that there's really a plug and play element for both the drivers and the fleet managers. But we also then coordinate those electric vehicles to integrate them with the grid, to provide services to utilities, to the customer, to other stakeholders that can ultimately provide revenue to the school as part of their investment in their electric vehicle. We've actually been working with this technology with both electric vehicles and specifically bi-directional V2G vehicles that can discharge their batteries when parked and act as a storage resource for the grid. We've been doing that in Europe for about 5 years, actually coordinating fleets across countries to integrate them as distributed energy resources for stakeholders in the UK, in Denmark, in France. As we've been doing that, we've been learning and working on standards, on electric markets, on metering, on the structures of transportation electrification programs and funding. We have a lot of lessons learned and best practices. And when we came back to the US to start working on new resources like school buses, we found that the transportation electrification project is really just starting, and that leaves a lot of room for work. And so we've taken all of this knowledge that we're bringing back from Europe and made it into a turnkey solution to integrate the school bus, the charging station, our software platform, to allow us to make a full contract with the school where we're actually able to finance the bus and the charger up front, removing the capital cost and risk from the school entirely, and actually making back our investment over the life of that bus through the types of revenues that we're able to get from the types of programs like Duncan was describing. But we can also contribute to alleviating grid emergencies, for instance, in California, as we see the lights going out in Texas, in California, in various places around the country for various reasons. Yes, you could use your school as a backup generator, or you could use your bus as a backup generator. We're definitely interested in keeping those lights from going out in the first place, if possible. And so we actually look at the aggregate of all the school buses that are in a state or in an electric system and what those can do together to actually remove grid stress. As Trisha said, there are 480,000 school buses in the United States. It's the largest fleet we've got. But right now, there are 1,164 that have gone electric. There are about 30 states that have electric school buses, but really they're concentrated in maybe half a dozen states. So we have a long way to go. Why? I think one of the reasons is that an electric school bus can be 3 times as expensive as a diesel model. The rate of electrification for schools is proceeding at the rate of subsidy availability mostly at this point. And to me, this says that policy solutions will be pivotal to accelerating this rollout. It also says that we can get this wrong. And so we need to step back and think about what schools in particular actually need when it comes to their procurement, their process of actually making investment decisions and safety decisions for their students. And rebates, for instance, may not get you there. When you actually need the school to be coming up with the upfront costs just by themselves in order to then get refunded, they may not be able to do that in the first place. You may be putting school buses in competition with other types of vehicles that are more likely to get grants than a school bus because of the duty cycle. You may end up with schools cobbling together 5 different sources of funding that can actually result in incompatible systems where the electric bus may not actually charge with the EVSE that they've been able to get through the different types of funding streams they're getting. These are the sorts of things that we as Nuvve end up working a lot with the schools to try to help them through this process. You actually get schools hiring consultants just to get them through the process of electrifying their bus fleets. And so what I think I can say on a policy front, what we need to do is establish coherent, logical processes that are consistent across states and across the country that schools can actually march through and not be completely confused and completely dismayed as they try to do it. Gina McCarthy mentioned a number, 500,000 charging stations that they're aiming at. We need nearly that many just for school buses. And so companies like mine, companies like Highland Electric are trying to actually establish private mechanisms for doing this that can result in a self-sustaining, continuously accelerating school bus electrification market. And I think that policy is going to be one of the things that really helps us create the framework for that.
Great, thank you, Jackie. Fantastic. So I was really learning from you that we already have so many lessons learned and best practices from your experience in Europe and then other places around the world too. And then the US is right now at this cusp to go big, essentially. So I'm wondering if you can speak to maybe some more of those lessons learned or the insights from other markets. You mentioned some standardization of processes with the schools. Are there other things that need to be standardized? And maybe you can bring in some examples from the Mount Diablo school district that just was utilizing some of your products to electrify their school fleet.
Yeah, one of the difficult parts of electrifying school buses, particularly if you're talking to the school bus manufacturers themselves, the charging station manufacturers as well, is that the requirements to actually plug these things in may vary state by state. And particularly when we start talking about V2G, when we start talking about having these things discharge their batteries, utilities in each state may have slightly different requirements for while the safety requirements remain. There will be technical requirements that vary, and both bus manufacturers and charging station manufacturers need to be able to sell and be confident that they will be able to use these devices as intended anywhere in the country, one model. That is the kind of standardization that will actually help us accelerate rather than needing to make tweaks, 50 different tweaks to a production model that needs to be able to roll off at a rate of hundreds a week if we want to be able to do this.
Well, so to follow up on that then, so I mean, you were starting to also talk about some of the processes that the schools had walked through, and then the funding opportunities too. So I'm wondering if you can, if there's a school that's, they're usually very historically underfunded. And so how does that school make that decision then to prioritize transportation and to electrify their fleet? Are there lessons learned there or things that you've seen that can help those school districts move forward?
What we've found is that schools want badly to do this. And so really figuring out how to facilitate them doing this. And, we've worked in several disadvantaged communities that are very committed and are tenacious in finding grant funding. And as I said, they may have grants from the federal government, the state government, their municipality, an NGO, all coming together to get themselves 1, 2, 5 electric buses. They have many more that they want to be able to actually electrify. And so, even just establishing a centralized database, a centralized place that they can go to actually access the different funding levels that they will need to be able to get this would likely help a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jackie. And we're going to continue our discussion with you just after we hear from 2 more panelists. So we'll bring you up in just a few more minutes. And right now we will introduce JoAnn Covington, who is the Chief Legal Officer and Head of Government Relations at Proterra. JoAnn leads the company's legal and government relations team and serves as corporate secretary. So JoAnn, I'm so pleased that you could join us today, and we'll turn it to you for some insights.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is JoAnn Covington, and I'm the Chief Legal Officer and Head of Government Relations at Proterra. Thank you to the organizers of today's event and to World EV Day for having me here today. It is fantastic to be surrounded by so many leaders in the growing movement for electrification. This is an incredibly exciting time for transportation electrification here in the United States and globally. It's also a time of great importance. The growing signs and impacts of climate change tell us that we need to act boldly to decarbonize transportation, such as school buses, to protect the public health and the planet. Important progress is being made, and I'm so delighted to share more about how Proterra is powering the switch to zero-emission school buses with our technology. Proterra was founded on a simple vision that is clean, quiet transportation for all. We are a leader in the design and manufacture of battery systems and electric drivetrains for commercial vehicles, charging infrastructure solutions for commercial fleets, and zero-emission electric transit buses. We delivered our first zero-emission electric transit bus more than 10 years ago in Southern California. Since then, we've put more than 700 electric transit buses on the road across North America, and those buses have driven more than 20 million miles in revenue service. Through deploying those transit buses, we've learned what it takes to manufacture a commercial, heavy-duty, medium-duty, all-electric vehicle. This includes one of the most important applications for electrification technology that we're discussing here today, and that is the school bus. Over 90% of school bus fleet in the United States is fueled by diesel. We can certainly do better. Switching to electric school buses means cleaner air for our kids to breathe and a healthier planet. So in 2018, Proterra and our partner Thomas Built Buses unveiled the first Proterra-powered electric school bus. That is the all-electric Safety Liner C2 Julie, powered by Proterra's electric vehicle technology and built on the Thomas Built Buses school bus platform, all manufactured here in the US. Along with our partner Thomas Built, we've delivered more than 50 electric school buses nationwide, from Talk, Alaska to Beverly, Massachusetts, where we are proud to have worked with Highland Electric to bring the first electric school buses to that community. This also includes Montgomery County, Maryland, where earlier this year, the local Board of Education approved a project with Highland Electric to convert its school bus fleet to all electric, starting with 326 school buses over the next 4 years. This project represents the largest single procurement of electric school buses in North America. As an American company, we believe that the technologies we need to meet the global demand for zero-emission transportation can and must be built right here in the United States. With more than 700 employees in the US, including many represented by our union, United Steelworkers in California, we are experiencing this firsthand at Proterra. Last year, Proterra marked the opening of a new battery production line in Los Angeles County. This facility will expand our production capacity to manufacture our industry-leading battery technology systems that power our fleet of transit buses, as well as commercial vehicles, including school buses, and create local jobs in the process. Building advanced manufacturing workforce also requires an investment in training and workforce development. That's why, along with our union partners, our community partners in Los Angeles County, we launched the first of its kind training program for job applicants interested in electric vehicle manufacturing. And we celebrated the first graduating class in January, and our current cohort of students is going through the program now and will complete in 2 weeks. This training program was developed to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in EV manufacturing by targeting historically underrepresented groups with barriers to employment, including women, people of color, aging foster youth, veterans, and the formerly incarcerated. As the transportation industry transitions from fossil fuels, we are modeling how American manufacturing companies and workers can come together to create manufacturing jobs in clean tech for the 21st century. The United States is positioned to lead the world in this emerging market for clean energy and clean mobility. And this includes areas like electric school buses, which today don't receive the same type of federal funding for electrification as transit buses, but there are lots of lessons learned from transit electrification, and we're hopeful that we'll see more funding coming in this area shortly. Through meaningful measures to expand support for this emerging industry, through policies that promote manufacturing, domestic supply chain, and workforce training, we believe we can bring the next wave of innovation and clean transportation jobs directly to communities across the United States, along with clean transportation. So thank you again to today's organizers for having me here, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the audience.
Great, thank you, JoAnn. And we do have a number of questions coming in for you. I really liked what you were saying there too about the workforce training program that you guys have. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that later on. One of the questions that came in though was about your guys' battery expertise and depth of knowledge there. And you mentioned that you have a project in Alaska where you partner with the Alaska Energy Authority. So I'm just curious, on the light duty side of the market, sometimes we hear, oh, cold weather, hot weather, not so good for batteries, but what's been your experience to date with the batteries in electric school buses?
Absolutely. So we have a lot of experience deploying batteries in buses across the United States. We have buses in Lubbock, Texas, very hot. We've got buses up in Edmonton, Canada. We've got our first school bus, as you noted, in Juneau, Alaska. That bus has performed in conditions as low as minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. The key is we develop these battery systems to be happy in any climate. And a lot of our technology goes into safe deployment, because of course we're carrying children and people, across the country in these buses, but also that reliability. And so our battery systems are designed, and we have a lot of patented and proprietary technology around this as well, to work no matter what the external environment brings to bear against the battery system.
Mm. And then you mentioned some of the partnerships and the stakeholders that you all work with. And I know you've got great expertise and experience working with utilities and then cities and then also the school districts to bring everyone to the table, and kind of what Duncan was saying, to establish that process, get the plan together, and then move forward. So I'm just curious, in your experience there, are there other stakeholders that we should be thinking about and bringing to the table to make this transition a reality?
Absolutely. Highland Electric has a great model. We love the one-stop shop for deploying electric fleets like school buses to help school districts and community partners think through all of the aspects of that, transportation as a service. Utilities have a very meaningful role to play in the adoption of electric vehicles. We really think about the vehicles and these charging systems as strategic assets to the grid. That's one of the things that most excites me about the possibility of all electric transportation in the United States. One example to dealing with the upfront cost issue that you have with investing in electric buses at this stage in the technical development is Dominion Energy in Virginia. So that investment by the utility in thinking through buses as a strategic asset to the grid, that induces the utility to help with that upfront cost. So Dominion Energy will cover the difference between a diesel bus and an electric bus. So each Virginia school district can save up to $700 per month or over $8,000 per year in operating costs, according to Dominion. And they aim to have 1,000 electric school buses deployed by 2025 and replace all of those diesel buses with electric school buses. That will bring, according to their assessments, adding those 1,000 electric school buses will allow them to store enough energy to power 10,000 homes and to shave off the cost of peak energy usage, as Duncan was mentioning earlier. So you can see a lot of models out there where we're demonstrating that it makes sense to go all electric, even though the upfront cost now is great. Over time, it will be very cost effective. We've seen that with transit, and we will see that with school buses.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, JoAnn. We're going to continue with one more panelist before we get into the larger discussion then, which we have so many questions coming in for all of our panelists. But next up right now, we have Nate Baguio, who is the Senior VP of Commercial Development at Highland Electric. And Nate has been with Highland for 3 years, the first company in the electric school bus space, and the only EV school bus with 1 million road miles traveled. So once again, if you have a question for Nate, please put it in the Q&A and we will turn it over to Nate.
Thank you, Katherine. And we have 8 million miles of on-road experience with yellow school buses, all EV. This is an exciting time, and I could listen to these panelists go on for hours, and this industry is moving so fast and doing some really dynamic things that are going to speed up the deployment of electric yellow school buses. When you talk to school districts, as some of these questions are coming in, there are a number of reasons why a school district will adopt electric vehicles. Student health is certainly one, worker health, lower costs. There's certainly an economic argument when you're talking about operating costs for a yellow school bus. But what I think is really important for everyone to understand that, at Highland Electric, our buses have been on the road since 2016. They're taking kids to school every single school day and have been for years. The electric school bus is a real part of the school community fabric. It's already real. This is not a pilot. This is not an experiment. And we are taking steps to electrify all approximately 500,000 school buses in the United States and beyond, and even into North America. So, I think it was Jackie who said we have a long way to go. We do, but I think when you look at this panel and you look at some of the things that Highland Electric is doing, certainly, I think that road is a lot shorter than most people think. The electrification of the yellow school bus is our lifetime. It's a goal that can be achieved in that time frame. So again, I'm Nate Baguio with the Highland Electric. And to just give you a little bit of color on my background, I've been in transportation for over 30 years. I drove a school bus at one point when I was in college many years ago, but also managed fleets. And I can tell you that spending over 2 decades in the school bus industry, walking into yards that I managed with 300 school buses starting up every morning, every school day with diesel fumes, just overtaking the yard, overtaking the community, overtaking workers all at once is not what we should be doing, especially since we have a better way in our hands now. This is inevitable. And this will happen. One of the other great things is we have, 450 vehicles on the road now. We have a factory that is going to open next year that's going to have a manufacturing capacity of over 20,000 vehicles per year. And that's in addition to our parent factory in Montreal that's already doing 2,500 per year. So closing that gap in achieving that goal of getting all of these students, as Trisha mentioned, out of these dirty diesel buses is achievable. And we're working, to scale and at a pace that's going to do that. One of the other things is the average school bus route is about 73 miles, a lot or less than that. And when you look at the range on an electric school bus, our top range is 155 miles. And it more than covers the school day. We have several customers that don't even charge every day. So there's that extra energy in the battery that Nuvve, Highland Electric, and a number of other energy companies are very interested in. It's not just a school bus anymore, as you can tell from the panelists that we have here. The other thing that we're seeing is this is not just a California electric vehicle thing. We've sold them in Tennessee. We sold them in rural Missouri. We had a demonstration in rural Missouri where the snowstorm was so bad that school was closed, but the Lion demo went on. And we had a number of superintendents there that got on the bus and drove in those weather conditions. So the platform is robust. And being born and raised in California, I can tell you that the bus performed much better than I did in those temperatures. One of the other things that's important to note is you see a lot of the incentive funding coming forward. And CalSTART did a study that every dollar of incentive funding towards EV technology yields $6 in economic benefit in the communities that are receiving that incentives. So through savings, through health impacts, through helping disadvantaged communities, and also the generation of jobs. I've mentioned our factory. We're also doing battery manufacturing. We're building our own batteries like a lot of folks are doing. And it is creating jobs, and then all of the supply chain jobs here in the US that are going to follow that. So it's also important to note that as well. One of the other things I'll touch on real quickly is there's a conference, Advanced Clean Transportation, that's held in Long Beach, and it was just held recently. If you went to that show 3 years ago, it was all compressed natural gas and propane. This year, it was almost exclusively electric vehicles. So when you look, we're talking about yellow school buses today, but when we're talking about infrastructure and shaving peak energy use in communities, it's the garbage trucks. It is your last mile delivery vehicles. We have sold trucks to Amazon. All of this is going to contribute to getting the price point of these vehicles down. We are almost at a point of volume where we are in a school bus platform, meet that TCO of a comparable diesel bus today. So, there are fewer and fewer arguments that are going to justify keeping a diesel vehicle on the road. And from there, I will open it up to questions.
Great, thank you, Nate. Well, with all of our panelists, we have a couple of questions coming in for you. So first off, can you just tell us a little bit more about the battery life? And I was reading, 15 years, but that's just even an early estimate too. It's likely that'll be even longer.
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually seeing better performance on the batteries in some pretty robust environments, freezing cold, hot weather. We anticipated a 15-year life on the battery, which is comparable to the useful life on a legacy fossil fuel bus. But we're seeing less than 0.5% of degradation year over year. So we think these buses are going to be useful well beyond that. And remember that there's a second life to these batteries too. So once they're not useful to be, powering a school bus, it is now going to be stationary storage for your solar panels, microgrid, and you can power your buildings, your hurricane shelters, your track meet session stand with what used to be your school bus energy source.
Yeah, this technology, it's here, it's tested. Let's do it. Well, this question from Kevin comes in, and he is wondering about the pros and cons of aggregated procurement for electric school buses. So if someone's looking at doing that, what advice would you give, or would you recommend starting with just one bus first to understand how it works?
Well, what I would recommend is looking at what your goal is. And I would say most of the school districts we talk to are looking to electrify their fleet. I think it was JoAnn that said that that people want to do this. that this is a better thing. So what I would do is engage your manufacturer, engage your utility early, so that your goal, you've got to get on the path to do that. And working with folks like Highland Electric, a lot of the budget issues are less difficult for school districts. So charging infrastructure, very important, but also make sure that all of your technologies work together and you achieve that goal.
And then what would be the timeline for transitioning your entire fleet to electric?
It depends on a number of factors. Again, infrastructure is going to play a key role. What do you have at the site now? What's it going to take to get the appropriate amount of power? What is the size of your fleet? There are a number of factors, and also how you're funded. Are there incentives coming down the road that are going to help you accelerate that? What I would tell you is the capacity to build and deliver the vehicle itself is not a limiting factor. Just the manufacturing capacity. And yes, we're coming out of COVID and there's still some supply chain issues lingering, but that's not a permanent situation. And the capacity to manufacture these vehicles and get kids in clean, healthy breathing buses is not going to be the issue.
All right, thank you, Nate. We're going to end your particular portion there. Now we're going to bring up the rest of the panelists. So all of our other panelists, please come back, and Trisha as well. And we will get into a discussion for about 15 minutes here, and then do another 10 minutes where each of the panelists are going to ask questions of one another too. So we're getting our Q&A ready, and just a reminder one more time, everybody, please type your Q&A into the chat. So one of the first questions here that we have is kind of about the opportunities and the barriers, keeping it really basic. I mean, you've all convinced me this is a great idea. The technology is here, let's do it. But what are the other barriers that we might be running into, whether you're a policy advocate, whether you're a school district, if you're a mom, a parent, guardian, what are some of the other barriers, and then what are the solutions there? And so Duncan, I'm going to turn it to you first for a response.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think in terms of the opportunity, Nate framed it up really well. I think school districts have the opportunity today to do something that's more around a full fleet transition. That's the opportunity, and they can do it at their own pace. I think our project in Maryland that JoAnn touched on with Montgomery County is a great example of that. It's a full fleet transition that's economic. There's also the opportunity for districts who want to sort of get more comfortable with the tech to do something that looks more like a pilot. We would just advocate that it's not one bus, because I think it's more difficult. I think if you've got a couple, you've got some redundancy across your systems, a little bit more robustness. The barriers are largely around cost and complexity. And I think I touched on it earlier, but the price tag is 2 to 3x what a traditional diesel bus costs. And I think it's an exercise in really unpacking the future value streams, whether it's lower operating costs, vehicle to grid income, monetizing tax credits and grants and things like that. But that can all be done. It's just complex today, and it's going to get easier over time. But I think everyone on this panel brings a ton of expertise, frankly, to sort of helping think through that. And for districts that want to go down this path, they just need to engage and sort of start the investigation. And then I would just say, one of the other barriers is that there are utilities out there that are very supportive and very helpful, and there are others that are still getting up to speed. And we definitely encourage utility companies to dedicate some people to the effort and build some programs and help their customers.
So Big Ten approach there. So JoAnn, let me turn it to you then and see if you've got more to add here in terms of the charging infrastructure, opportunities, barriers, and solutions.
Sure, absolutely. One thing I would say is that our experience with customers in transit, and we've deployed over 50 megawatt hours of charging infrastructure across transit customers in the United States, is that we often find that the customers think that they need more infrastructure and power capacity than they actually really do. And the key is when you charge and how you charge and charging things in sequence. There's lots of things that you can do to reduce the amount of power consumption and the amount of energy that you actually need to charge a fleet. So that upfront planning and working with the utilities and your vendors is very important. And that's sort of like job one. The other thing I would add about charging infrastructure, and someone had echoed this earlier, I think it was Jackie, is a need for standardization. And that's one thing that Proterra is very supportive, is using open charging standards, open communication protocols, so that you can charge multiple types of vehicles with the same infrastructure. And I'll give you an example of that. In Texas, we have a customer where we've installed Proterra chargers, and we use them to charge a Proterra bus, and we also use them to charge their New Flyer bus. We also commission these chargers using Chevy Bolt light duty vehicles. So if you can come up with solutions that are standardized that you can use for multiple vehicle types, it makes investment in that type of infrastructure more palatable for municipalities, cities, and hopefully school districts.
Nate or Jackie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting projects happening. Just to kind of continue what JoAnn was saying, in California, there's a Clean Mobility in Schools project where the California Air Resources Board is really forcing the charging infrastructure, solar, all of these clean energy and the vehicles, obviously, and forcing us together to standardize what we do and connect and make sure that we're leveraging all of these technologies together in one system. And I'm really excited to see that project blossom and grow and really force all of us in this technology space to not silo. The other part of that, along that same vein, is exactly what JoAnn said. We have a customer that's putting their charging infrastructure that it can be used inside and outside the fence of their yard. So they are now a fueling station for delivery trucks or any other vehicle that comes by. And they're now a fueling station, which is also another way to generate revenue, when it's not charging their school buses. So there's a lot of innovative ways that we can look at not just school buses, but the EV, the medium and heavy duty EV ecosystem to standardize and share and not silo. And I think, essentially that we'll see adoption move much faster the easier we make it for everyone.
Jackie?
Yeah, I'd like to add that a couple of years ago, the California Energy Commission actually created a program that funded the school bus companies to actually develop electric production models. And part of the spec that they were given as part of this program was that the buses should be V2G capable, that they should actually all in the production models that were developed into this program be capable of this. And so as a result of this, you actually do have the school bus industry as really at the forefront of truly smart electric vehicles, of actually having a large vehicle to grid capable fleet, capable of providing emergency backup, capable of providing grid services, demand response, of helping out in a pinch and making new revenue streams for the school, but also helping decrease the total cost of ownership. That kind of effort where the CEC actually gave the bus manufacturers a specification, actually essentially did help to push that standardization forward and really launched a national vehicle to grid fleet as we were able to use it. The next step with that is actually working with utilities. Because even in transportation electrification, the pace at which utilities are being asked to install, do studies for the grid and energize new electric vehicles and to interconnect school buses as distributed resources like a battery is going to overwhelm the capacity that utilities currently have to do this. I think that there needs to be a lot more focus. This is one of the barriers and one of the opportunities for states to actually get their transportation electrification programs right, and to act as a springboard for all of the participants on this call to actually really start moving.
We're going to move to another question here. And Jackie, we're going to stay with you. And so Stephen from our audience would like to know, so what ratio of EVSC, the charging infrastructure, to buses are you all seeing? Is it one, you need one station for one bus? Do you need, can 2 buses, 3 buses share a station? And then are most going with level 2 AC or the DC so that you can enable that bidirectional flow?
We're really getting a mix. And that is, you know, as Nate, as Duncan, everyone has been saying, part of the project for companies like ours is to work with the school, analyze their routes, analyze their energy usage, analyze their needs, and help them pick the solution that's right for them. So our level 2 AC, so that's 19.2 kilowatts or less, power ports are going like hotcakes. But at the same time, we have a lot of schools that may want some of their fleet to be at a higher power charger at the 60 kilowatt with the bidirectional capability that we offer. Not all of them, but again, it's a matter of choosing what works for that school. There are some schools who want all high powered chargers, and they may not need all of that capability every day. And so, you know, making sure that they have the right size solution for their needs is part of the responsibility and the opportunity for companies like ours to work with utilities and make sure that those costs and the trouble of installation of the line extension and that sort of thing is right sized for the school. So it depends. It's really the answer.
Depends. JoAnn, is that also what you're seeing? Your experience is that it depends, and you're seeing a wide range, level 2 DC, also 3 stations to 1 bus or more?
Right. I mean, it really, as I said earlier, it really is important to work up front with the customer to understand what their requirements are and what their expectations are. And a lot of times you can bring new ideas into that discussion that they hadn't thought of before. So that planning aspect is critical.
All right, I want to get into some of the phrasing that Duncan mentioned here about unlocking the future value of the electric school buses, and maybe even some of the innovative financing models that exist out there. And one person, Katherine from our audience, was hoping, Duncan, that you could elaborate a little bit more on the one-stop shop model that Highland Electric has, but then can you elaborate further also into the fleet as a service financing model?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think as a business, what we aim to do is facilitate electrification of these fleets to be more affordable and more turnkey. But within that, we're not trying to outsource transportation departments like a traditional contractor or fleet manager would. We're trying to fill in the gaps around the edges. And so we think about that as 5 or 6 things. It's planning. We're all talking about, you know, digging into the duty cycles and the charging needs. Financing, which is ultimately, you know, we're typically paying for all the equipment and taking on the risk. We can operate it affordably. Doing some building the site, electrifying that depot. So coordinating with the utility, hiring the local contractors, and actually pulling the permits and electrifying the depot. Training, providing some training for the drivers and the mechanics on how to keep the equipment running, and then providing managed charging on the backside every day, every night, and sometimes in the middle of the day. So bundling that all together, you know, those are a bunch of services and some need for expensive capital. You put that all together, we tend to charge by the mile. So an example would be a school district can spec their buses. We'll work with them to spec the charging infrastructure we think is needed. We'll then pay for everything. And for 10 years or 12 years, they can pay us $2.50 a mile. includes all the electricity. So there's no commodity risk around electricity purchasing. We'll typically even wrap the project with a 12-year warranty on all parts and labor. And so the point is, technology risk is off the table. Electricity cost risk is off the table. Execution risk is off the table. The contract is simple, and we take on a basket of risks that makes the transition easier. So that's essentially what we mean by transportation as a service.
And the one-stop model, one-stop shop
That's
model.
exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. Nate, do you have other thoughts to add? Innovative financing models, what you're seeing out there, and what's working?
Yeah, I think this is what we're seeing now is a transition from the traditional financing model to what is evolving now to take EV into consideration. You know, there was a lot of concern about residual risk on an asset that's so expensive and prices are coming down. But what we're seeing is a lot of interest in longer term financing that's designed for EV and also takes into consideration you know, the other functionality of a school bus. I think the audience is getting the sense that the yellow school bus isn't just a yellow school bus anymore. It's a mobile power plant. And more specifically, it's a source of potential revenue or use, you know, where you don't have to buy two things to do one thing. The yellow school bus can handle providing power, storing power, transporting students, and doing all of those things that you need, emergency power. So what we're seeing is that is really offsetting a lot of the costs that is causing concern. And I think the industry as a whole, and I'm talking transportation, is really warming up quickly to what EV is doing and what the potential is there.
Well, let's do one more question from our audience before we get into some cross-panelist questions there. And this one is for Trish, and then I'll pull on a couple other people to answer. But for Trisha, so how have you all gone about approaching school districts to electrify their bus fleets? What have you found that works best? And what advice would you give to somebody else who is looking to do the same thing?
Yeah, schools have been at the forefront of advocating for this transition to electric school buses, especially schools that are typically in lower income communities or communities of color that are disproportionately impacted from air pollution. They know that we need to make the transition now for the health of our children. And so, you know, this is like very grassrootsy, right? Like we have moms who are engaged with our organization. They have kids that go to school and they want to talk to their school boards about electrifying their school bus fleet and the health harms that diesel pollution is causing their children. And just as I shared the story of Jen earlier, she's been very instrumental in working with her school specifically and working with her members of Congress. She has Senator Cortez Masto as one of her senators, and she's introduced a school bus bill that does exactly this, that helps get communities like hers that are disproportionately impacted from pollution to have access to school buses. So we just need more families, more parents speaking up to their school boards and pushing them to be advocating for this.
And then Duncan, how have you guys been approaching as a manufacturer, the school district yourselves? What's been working best there? Or are you being brought in because there's a bigger grassroots movement and there's a lot of community action and then, you know, they reach out to you? Or is it both?
It's a little bit of all of the above today. You know, I think we've been most successful in communities where, you know, the moms have been there doing this work and laying a foundation in the community, right? There's an interest, it's a topic of conversation, there's been some exploration, and there's receptivity to finding solutions. We found that politicians can play a big role. Some politicians are running on platforms around, you know, clean air, equity, sustainability, climate change, you know, so in some cases, this is on their roadmap. Figure out how to electrify, starting with all the municipal fleets. And so we find the conversation is, We want to do our garbage trucks and our white fleet and our police cars and our school buses. And we say, okay, we can do school buses. Let's start there. And they say, great, let's start with school buses. So I think those communities are very, eager to find a solution. And then, we have a traditional direct sales effort that goes out and calls on school districts. We talk to 1 or 2 new school districts every day as a company. And, those are discovery conversations. Frankly, we're all still developing the market because there's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen, just basic education. And I guarantee you that Jackie and Nate and, JoAnn's colleagues at Proterra on the sales front who are, on the ground level, we're all contributing to that sort of baseline layer of education that the market needs. So there's a groundswell. It takes time, and it is taking time. But, I think as Nate said earlier, it feels like it's accelerating, which is really exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to now keep it on you, Duncan, actually, and we're going to now give you the opportunity to ask your fellow panelists a question. You can grill them. You can ask them to elaborate.
That sounds good. No grilling. It's the last event of the session. So I think the folks in the UK are ready for cocktail hour, and we don't want to keep them. But I will ask. So Jackie, you're in a really interesting place. You get the value that V2G can bring to this movement. You've seen it. You guys have been in this market for many, many years with real projects. We found that when you're looking to, the biggest elephant in the room is all around affordability. How do you put these vehicles into fleets in a way that doesn't break the budget? We believe heavily in V2G. We've seen it, and we've seen how impactful it can be to helping to pay for the bus. If you put aside the big federal infrastructure bill, cash on the hood, that's obviously great. We're excited. We're all excited about that. But if you put that aside, what is your one sort of dream policy that you think could unlock V2G value sort of in a nationwide level that you would advocate for? Because I would argue we should figure out what that one thing is, and we should all just see if there's a compelling business case, and we can all advocate for it collectively as an industry.
I mean, I would have a 10-part answer to that, of course. It's like asking about what's your favorite Led Zeppelin song. But I think, there are a lot of different elements that are falling into place. And, I think that people are sitting around saying, why hasn't this gone? Why hasn't it happened? And I think the people that have the starting gun in their hands don't realize that they have it. And so this is not just about school buses. This is about electric vehicles sitting at retail locations, being harnessed as distributed energy resources. And so really, this is about a larger integration along with solar, with batteries, with demand response. And a lot of those things, those policies actually come from the utility side. And so I would say on the utility side, what we actually need is changes in the way that rate structures work that acknowledge that there is going to be a resource sitting behind a person, sitting at a house, sitting at a building that is going to be able to discharge its battery at high levels, that is going to be extremely flexible about how and when it actually charges. And we need to shift to outcome-based policymaking, not saying, well, I have this thing, what should I do with it? But rather to say, what do we want these things to be to the system, and work backwards from that. We need to get the utilities and the regulators that work with them to dream big about what V2G in particular can be. But when it comes to actually firing the starting gun, I would say that it needs to come from agencies like the EPA, agencies like CARB at the state level, because what the auto industry has not yet gotten is a real signal at the federal or the state level that vehicle to grid technology, that this distributed energy resource capability is valued and important and wanted. If there are recognitions of, in terms of climate credits that go to auto manufacturers who include these capabilities in their cars, they will include them. They have not been given that signal yet. And so we need the push on the manufacturing side, and we need the pull on the utility side. So one thing, no, but we need those systems to come
Those
together.
13 things, Jackie, those 13 things. But it sounds
But, you
like
know,
get
go
the
ahead.
EPA to hit the starting gun, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's
Yeah.
a very cool idea, which I like a lot. And
But-
Sorry,
But I
go ahead.
think, you know, your company, as well as the joint venture that my company has formed with another infrastructure investor, you know, we've got $750 million waiting to invest in this kind of project. And what that says to me is that the investment is there. The interest from private industry is there. We're lacking the structures through which to put these investments. And so it comes from the regulators on the automotive side and on the electric grid side.
Interesting. So those that have the starting gun in their hand don't realize that they have it, like you said. Huh. Well, let's turn it to Nate now. Nate, do you have a question for your fellow panelists or for Trisha?
Yeah, actually, I do have a question for Trisha. You know, one of the things that we've done that's been effective is letting people ride the bus, letting people drive the bus, get on the bus, let kids see it. And that's really the most effective thing you can do. I can, you know, I think one of the attendees was saying, we're talking in an echo chamber, we all want to do this. How do we get other people to feel the same way we feel about this? And I think one of the key ways is to just get people in front of it. And my question to Trisha, I know we did an event with your group in Montana, but what was the reaction of the moms and the kids that see this bus? And is it a different reaction than, you know, what they see on their diesel bus?
Yeah, thanks, Nate. That's a great question. And it's so true. The feeling, touching, being on the bus, nothing can give you a better experience to want to have one of these for your children to ride. You get to see and hear, or not hear, how quiet and clean the electric buses are. So that event was a lot of fun, and you can see more about it. There's a fun video that we did with Lion on our website. But those moms were incredibly excited. They, you know, it just ramped up their drive to advocate for electric school buses. And I think there's nothing more real than actually having a bus to feel in touch. I do think this is so new. There's a lot of anxieties, not just for, you know, moms or schools, but for our policymakers, for members of Congress who don't understand what this means and what the benefits of electric school buses. I think the one big thing that we can do is inviting our elected officials to also include in not just moms and school boards, but the elected officials also need to be invited to know exactly what an electric school bus looks like and the benefits that it can bring to our children.
We're going to take one more quick question from JoAnn. And so JoAnn, we've got a couple seconds for your question and then who you're directing it to.
Okay, well, quick question, and again to Trisha, Moms Clean Air Force, but anybody, you have $2.5 billion in grant funding for your agency. What do you think the best way is to spend it to accelerate the electrification of school buses?
I can go
So
again.
Trisha.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So JoAnn is speaking about a recent policy that was passed in Congress, in the Senate, that would give $2.5 billion for electric school buses. And I know that there, you know, groups like Moms Clean Air Force are going to be following this until it's in the until the electric school buses are in the hands of the children and the school districts. And we will be engaging with the regulatory agencies, EPA and the DOE, to make sure that this funding is being put to use. that the money is going and being dispersed in an equitable manner. So the communities who, like I said earlier, are hardest hit by air pollution and, have the majority of the Title I schools are getting the benefits because they don't have the resources, unfortunately, to make this transition. They need, the federal help like this $2.5 billion.
All right, well, I'd like to thank all the panelists for their time today and the really insightful discussion. I think that was fantastic, and there's a lot of definite action items that we can take away with this discussion from. And I'll look forward to the part 2, maybe in a couple months or next year for next World EV Day, when we're deployed hundreds of thousands of school buses, electric school buses around the world. So thank you to all of our panelists again. And Trisha, we're going to come back to you right now, actually, for just a couple more of some closing remarks, and then we'll end our panel today.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to end on a high note. So the great news in all of that we heard today by our remarkable panelists is that the movement to electrify our school buses is getting the recognition it deserves. Like we said, moms, school boards, everyone is engaged in this movement. The American public knows that electrifying our school buses is a win-win for health and our kids and the climate. The excitement is growing. As I think Nate mentioned earlier, Moms Clean Air Force co-hosted more than 30 events across the country this summer, focused on the need to electrify our school buses to protect the health of our children and clean up the climate. Many of our panelists here today were an integral part of these events and can attest to the groundswell of interest from communities, like we heard from Nate. So how do we make good on this enthusiasm? We know it's the local and grassroots action that can make electric school buses a reality. And we have so many committed partners and parents already involved, but we need even more advocates to join us. As Jackie said earlier, coherent, logical policy solutions are critical in this transition to electrify our school buses. And what we need now could not be more clear. We need investments. Right now, and through the process of budget reconciliation, Congress has the opportunity to make historic investments to electrify our nation's iconic yellow school buses. We need boldness. We need Congress to deliver on bold investments in this sector to the tune of at least $20 billion. We need, I've said this over and over, equity. We need to ensure that the children who need it most have access to zero emission buses who otherwise couldn't afford them. This would be equity in action. And advocacy. We need every community to speak up loudly and tell their elected leaders that it's time to go on electric. Our children deserve a cleaner, safer ride in life. Together, let's make electric school buses a reality for all children.
Thank you, Trisha. I love that. And that's how we're going to leave it today. We're going to leave on it's time to make it a reality to go electric. And so thank you, Trisha, again. Thank you, all of our panelists. And thank you, attendees, for listening in today. This is what World EV Day is all about, bringing EVs to you and really sparking that EV revolution. So I encourage you to reach out to your local policymakers and help make electric school buses a reality. And I also would just encourage everybody right now to engage with World EV Day on social media and help us spread the news far and wide about electric vehicles, about electric school buses, etc. Now, all that's left to say is just one more thank you to everybody and a round of applause, a virtual round of applause, and happy World EV Day. We'll see you next time for another event. Bye.